Early in leadership, it feels like everything depends on what you do. But later you realise just as much depends on how you think and who you are when the pressure is on. In this episode, Philip Britton MBE joins me to reflect on the leadership lessons that only become obvious in hindsight. That shift from the constant doing to an intentional being, the discipline of thinking deeply, and the judgement required when decisions are complex and the stakes are high. Welcome to the Independent School podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. I'm a trusted advisor, executive coach and strategist, working with accomplished leaders who are navigating complex challenges, the kind that can feel like a tangled ball of string, confusing, frustrating, and hard to unpick. In this new series, I bring you real-world conversations with principals, heads and CEOs of independent and international schools. Together, we explore problem-solving in uncertainty, staying strategic amidst the daily bustle of leadership, and building high-performing teams. Today, I'm joined by Philip Britton MBE, Head of Foundation at Bolton School here in the UK, a school of some 2,400 pupils from nursery to sixth form across boys, girls and primary divisions. Philip was born on Tyneside, took a first in physics at Oxford and completed teacher training at Cambridge. He worked as a physics teacher, head of physics and then deputy head at Leeds Grammar School, where he now serves as a governor, before moving to Bolton in 2008. In 2010, he was awarded an MBE for services to physics, and he's a fellow of the Institute of Physics, where he served as vice president for education. He's been closely involved with physics education, encouraging teachers to inspire the next generation of physicists. Philip is currently chair of HMC and the director of the Independent Schools Council. He's also a deputy lieutenant in Greater Manchester, holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Bolton, and is a fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching. He's also been heavily involved in schools fundraising, including recently chairing the trustees of IDPE for a 3-year term. Philip first joined me on the podcast in 2022 to talk about developing school strategy and fundraising. So in this conversation, we take a slightly different angle. We reflected on the leadership lessons that only became obvious over time. The shift from relentless doing to an intentional being. The discipline of thinking deeply and the judgment required when decisions are complex and sometimes simply the least bad option available. There's also a really strong thread of reassurance running through this episode. It's about giving yourself permission to pause, to focus on the why, and to accept that not every decision will feel straightforward. So here we go. Let's get into my conversation with Philip Britton. Hello, Philip. Welcome back indeed to the Independent School podcast. Fantastic to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to join you.
So what I'd love to start with is to understand this is a challenging job. This is a challenging sector to be leading in. And yet most of the school leaders I meet are so committed and passionate still about education. For you, what is it that's kept you passionate all this time through your career about education?
I think in education and schools, it has to be the children. That is what schools are about. That focus, I think, drives many leaders in all sectors. If you can make a school work well for the children, it will be working well for parents, and it will be working well for your colleagues, and it will be doing the job it should be doing. So definitely the young people.
Yeah. Do you get much time to be with them still? I guess that's one of the things about leadership is you spend a little bit less time.
Not so much time with them as used to be, but working in an environment where clearly that is the everyday rhythm of the school, and also how those wheels turn through introducing a year 7 in September through to mock exams now for year 11 and 13, and then HE choices for those leaving. There is a wheel that turns in school life that I think keeps things always fresh.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The wheel turns on a daily basis. You've got the breaks and the rhythm to each school day. The wheel turns on an annual basis. And then there's also that pride that comes with seeing that child that came into your school whether it's at age 4 or year 7, all the way through to they're just about to finish and go to university. So there's kind of a rhythm that happens over a longer period as well, isn't it? All of them nest together.
They do, and I think that's one of the particular joys of school leadership, but and also one of its challenges, because if you look at that through the wrong lens, everything is always the same. But I think any school leader would tell you that whilst it looks the same, everything is always different, and there are always different internal and external challenges, and that makes the job one of the very best to do.
Yeah, it definitely evolves. The core might stay the same. The core is the education of the young people, but everything else around it ebbs and flows, and there's different rhythms to different political cycles, different elements of economic cycles, different elements of regulation as they come and go as well. So, Philip, what I'd love to explore with you in this conversation today is the things that look really obvious to you now with all the experience that you have, which maybe back in the early days of your leadership weren't as obvious to you then, things that maybe were a little bit harder or took a bit more courage back then, which now you just sail through and find easy. I think an interesting place to start at the micro level is what could be called time management. It's that sense of making sure that what you're able to do is actually not just operational firefighting, because a lot of us get drawn into that still, especially the early stages of leadership. And it's the ability to manage your time, to create time to think, time to talk to others in a really deep strategic way, and then time to really get into the strategic level decision making. What do you do now that kind of helps you to balance that firefighting with the strategic side of leadership?
I think that journey you described from the beginnings of leadership to now is absolutely something that would be useful to discuss, and everyone's journey will be different. But I think for me, it was recognizing in a school leader's point of view that simply being is of importance, and doing is clearly vital, and there are lots and lots of tasks. But a really important part of a school leader's job is simply to be. And so whilst you are out and about on the corridors, or when you are meeting people at a parents' event, or when you're on stage giving out yet more awards, that is the job. And fretting and worrying that therefore you're not getting through a to-do list, or not working through an email inbox is not necessary. So giving yourself permission simply to enjoy the job by interacting with people, because being is what you are for. You are the visible leader of a school, as well as an administrative leader of the school and a strategic leader of the school. So that is certainly, being is just as important as doing, would be one message to my younger self.
Yeah.
I think giving yourself room to think, which you alluded to, is hugely important and can seem really selfish. That dawned on me relatively early on, when I worked out that I began to enjoy train journeys in order to think. And then it struck me that actually that was adding enormous value to the school in reality. And then I thought, well, this is a bit odd, having to book a train journey to actually think. And that then leads to a better apportionment of diary, just occasionally to leave a gap to catch up, of course, but also to just get ahead, and again, not feel concerned that somehow there is a to-do list off stage that is more important than just thinking something through really carefully, which plays into the strategic question you were asking amongst the how have things developed, because without doubt the strategic is enormously important, and thinking really carefully, really deeply before acting is central to all that we do as leaders.
Yeah. The common theme there feels like it's slowing down to speed up, that it's not about rushing through a to-do list. It's about being, which I think is put beautifully. I've never heard it put quite so succinctly, that it's about the being, not just the doing. And then the thinking deeply can look to the outside, you might be thinking individually, you might be thinking in a group, but it can look to the outside like not much is happening, but actually that's the slowing down to speed up in action. That's the ability to really think through deeply the next step of a particular challenge.
As many people listening will know, in independent schools, they are always complex, multi-layered institutions with many stakeholders, usually obviously parents and pupils, but our colleagues are all passionate about their school and feel ownership of areas of that school. And I think, again, particularly in these times of significant headwinds where serious choices are being made, working through who will be most impacted by, who will be most engaged with, all of those different facets of the consequence of a decision. And so far as is possible, trying to discuss with and inform before decisions are announced is really important. And it's not always obvious who will care the most. And I think that is important as well. And there, I'm not describing a world of consensus, because another thing that is largely impossible in complex independent schools is consensus. People will not agree, and particularly they won't agree where significant choices are being made against headwinds, but they can feel that they understand the why. And that probably would be my final message to my younger self, that the why matters far more than the what. If colleagues around you understand why you're trying to do something, then that makes the what you're suggesting they do and how that might be done and all of the other detail much more understandable. And it's easy early doors in leadership to forget the why, or the why might be really obvious to you. But the why really is a driver for everyone.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that why question can be useful at different stages. So if you're asking the why question early on before you've made a decision, maybe something slightly less requiring confidentiality, you can get lots of different viewpoints. Then actually the why conversation helps each of us to understand that we had part of the picture, but there's actually other elements to the picture that get filled in, getting the multiple viewpoints. And then it's also true where there has to be a more confidential decision-making process, and you're then communicating both the final decision and the why to people simultaneously. Having gone through that process of understanding it yourselves behind closed doors, you're then able to properly articulate the why to others in a way that they can then, as you say, maybe they won't agree, but they can at least understand the rationale behind the decision that's been made. Yeah, really important.
I think that's absolutely true. And the balance of firefighting to strategy, I think, for me, is best articulated as always trying to fight those fires, and they exist in any school, but in the context of and guided by some pretty high level principles about what matters. Because I think for leaders, if at all possible, in any choices we make, we do so based on a relatively simple matrix of what matters to our school and to us. And again, that's another issue, isn't it? Very often we are the guardians of our school. You know, the school will exist after us. It existed before us. Our job is to make it a little bit better whilst we're here. So it is much more about the school than it is about us. And understanding what those guiding principles are to the school is vital, I think. Even if what we're actually talking about in the current times is that very sadly your school isn't going to exist after you. It is still right to try to find a dignified and proper end to a long history.
Yeah, absolutely. And often what that unpacks is assumptions about what's important. And if we don't, it's not like the why conversation. If we don't talk about what I think is important and what you think is important and what the other people in the room think is important, we all just assume that we're all the same and everyone thinks like we do. And if I bring to mind some of the most challenging situations where I've had to facilitate or kind of mediate almost within maybe a governing body, for example, or senior leadership team where there's a disagreement and there is no consensus, the conversation that's unlocked the way forward has always been what needs to be true for this recommended option to be the best one versus this other one. And it's all about getting underneath to the assumptions and the what really matters. What is it, the core of what matters when we're making this decision?
I think that's another of the leadership things one learns in time. So it's really important to recognise when a group of people in the room appear to be agreeing but actually aren't, because of those assumptions not being shared. So it is quite possible, it happens quite often, that a room, a meeting will be coming to a view, but that actually they don't agree with one another. And that is also fine, but it's important that they recognise they don't. And that perhaps is another maturing of leader point, that the inclination is to bag the win whilst you can. I've got a room full of people agreeing. Let's not put a spoke in the wheels. But actually, it is vital to put the spoke in the wheels, because that agreement will never survive the unraveling of those different assumptions.
Yeah.
So a really important job of the leader, whether reacting in the moment or with the longer term, is to understand whether people do engage and agree for the right reasons, or because of a premise that is not sound.
I think that comes back to your previous point about what's important as we're making this decision. So if the only important thing is that we get out of this room with a consensus, fine, we've all agreed, let's go and have a cup of tea, everything's fine. But actually, normally the objective is, yes, we need to make this particular decision, and we want to deepen our understanding of how all of us see the world differently. We want to forge better relationships, which means understanding the values that each of us have around this table and the ways of working, the ways of being that we all are. If the goal is much broader than just let's get this particular decision over the line, which it really should be in most of these decisions, if the goal is broadly defined as getting to know ourselves as a group better, as well as getting a particular decision over the line, then you always want to unpick what's going on under the surface of what might look like a consensus agreement, but everyone's come at it from a completely different angle, and that's going to be shaky really quickly soon after.
That's really important, and I think one of the situations that schools find themselves in at the moment is because of probably the most difficult environment for independent schools for 50 years, arguably, is that it has exposed teams that are not strong. It's exposed teams that don't really have those shared values. And when I say team, it has probably exposed the executive governance angle more than ever before. I know that a lot of teams have had real success in stripping that back to basics. There are a variety of ways, aren't there, of how you get to know what sort of person you are and how you make decisions, and understanding how others on your team make those decisions, and ideally finding the collective of that as a positive synergy rather than a disruptive force. And it's quite interesting, at what might be the busiest ever times, some school teams have stepped back and sought to understand themselves better as a team.
Yes.
And yet, actually, that may be a crucial step in having any chance of navigating the landscape that they find themselves in. The other point I would make, though, is that it's really important for the head or the leader to find what their team is, because within most schools, there will be a wall between the head and essentially everyone else. And where that team or support mechanism is for the school leader is also a really, really important question. And that will be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For some, it might be rooted in family. For some, it might be in a coaching relationship. For some, it might be a governing body that is supportive in that way. But one of the challenges of current leadership is well, it always has been a lonely position being a head. But in current times, when not many people might be able to view the spreadsheet as it looks ahead, then it is even lonelier. And
Yes.
I would definitely encourage those listening to be sure that whatever it is for them, there is some sense of team around them that is that social team.
Yeah, it's knowing what you can get from the different people around you, isn't it? So when you're a head leading a team, getting to know each other, it's a great example of the slowing down to speed up. It is that sense of let's pause and get to know each other better so that we can make really quick fire, high stakes decisions over the next, month to 18 months. And then when it's the head thinking about what support do I have, then yes, it is your executive team to some extent, but there are some things you won't be able to share with them, especially if they're worries and concerns and anxieties that you might not be able to share with them. And that's where a mentoring or coaching conversation can really come into its own, because that's where you can slow down to speed up. You can slow down. Okay, I don't have to do anything for the next hour or the next 90 minutes. I'm going to really dig into having a really good conversation with a thought partner who's going to help me unpick various different things that might be happening. And knowing that you can share in that conversation things that you're not really sure about, but you've just got an inkling, or your gut intuition is telling you something, but you're not sure what yet. It doesn't all have to be evidence-based, kind of analytical conversation. You can actually tap into things which are less formed yet, but are just as important. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely so, and that also is the leader being able to be the person that openly introduces a conversation where it is not intended to converge to a presupposed answer, but I think that requires the capacity of the team around you, which we've touched on, but I think is also really important, because it needs those in your senior team to know that if you say something, it isn't the answer because you happen to be in charge. It's the start of a discussion.
yes.
And clearly at some point you will be the one to decide, but it's important to put alternate views and to argue counter narratives. And we've been probably focusing, or certainly I have in my head, on a senior team in school, but also I think this high performing team through the layers of a school life is also really important. I think one of the most challenging roles are those in middle management that many senior leaders listening will have passed through. But in middle management, above all, you are clearly between managing and leading a group of people less senior, but also managing up a group of people who are more senior. Are you shop steward, or are you the boss of that group of people? The influence and reach of heads of department in our schools is hugely significant. And arguably what daily life feels like, what the why is for the school, may well be set far more by a head of department or a head of year or a head of a boarding house than it is actually set by the senior team, because it's a more frequent contact, it's a daily contact. So I think one of the things our schools are all doing as well is looking to upskill heads of department. It's a long time since their job was to order the stationery and choose a syllabus, and that was 2 decades ago. But I think in the last 2 or 3 years that change has accelerated to be far more influential in a school, but in a very different way to previously. So the more we can all do to develop our teams at all levels, I think our schools will be more resilient and more robust.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And that middle leadership position, it feels like it's a crunch point in the organization to me, because you're still doing a lot of operational work. So having the luxury to block big times out in your diary to do strategic work, it just isn't there at that level. Is a mostly an organizational operational role. And yet you're being asked to think strategically, which may be something that you haven't necessarily had a lot of practice at. So I think there's that time crunch point at that point in the leadership journey. There's also a really interesting idea around where is your home team? Where do you feel most at home? When you rise up into senior leadership, one of the transitions that you make is you realize that your home team is the senior team. And so you have a collective responsibility within that group to be open and robust and honest about your opinions behind closed doors within that group, but then to represent with collective responsibility the decisions that flow out from that group. But when you're at middle leadership level, your home team doesn't feel like it's all of the other middle leaders. Normally, your home team feels like it's your department or your boarding house. Psychologically, that's almost certainly the way people default to. And so it can be much harder to put on different hats effectively, to realize that actually, in this particular instance, I'm not here to represent every individual and to protect every individual member of my team. I'm here to be collectively responsible for the decisions that flow down from above and actually putting them into action, putting them into place in a way that feels rooted in our values. But you have to switch your home team mentality. And I think those two reasons, and probably many more, but those two reasons are why the middle management feels like a real crunch point from the way I see it.
I think I'd absolutely agree, and for all of those reasons, I think that's why it's important for schools to develop the capacity of those middle leaders. I think another way that I've seen that over the years is that is whether your daily round is driven by a timetable or a diary. For a classroom teacher, it's obviously the timetable. For a senior leader, it's obviously a diary. For a middle leader, it's a bit of both, and that represents a real challenge that as senior leaders we need to acknowledge, because it is important that those roles in school are functioning well in order for us to achieve our own ambitions.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you alluded to earlier that I'd love to dive into a little bit more was those kind of high stakes decisions, the decisions that you know that you need to make with your senior team, hopefully a high performing senior team, hopefully with the support of governors and all those relationships are strong. It feels to me that sometimes when we're making these high stakes decisions, they feel high stakes because of our assumptions and who we're being in that moment, rather than the actual decision itself. So some people I coach are making really big decisions and they're feeling quite relaxed, quite calm. They know they've got a big decision ahead, but they're feeling quite good about it. And other people find quite straightforward things. They become very high stakes because of the way they think about them, the way they feel about them. Is that something that's shifted in your leadership journey? Have you found that your capacity to deal with what might feel like high stakes has increased over time?
I think it probably has, and I don't think that's just the carelessness of age. I think you perhaps come to realise that many choices that appear to be really important are not quite as important as they seemed. However, obviously, many school leaders at the moment are making absolutely crucial decisions. But in an early part of school leadership, probably it's easy to sweat the small stuff, and in effect, if you chose A or B, nothing much different would happen. What I found really useful over the years is just that counterfactual reasoning business. What if I didn't do this? So once you've decided what you are going to do, ask yourself what would happen if you didn't. And if it turns out that actually a few steps down that reasoning, there's no discernible difference to your school, then it probably wasn't a high stakes choice in the first place, but it felt like it. For me, being as informed as possible, so the data needs to be as good as it can be. But I think it is a truth that you can't have a perfect data set and you can't make a perfect decision. And so what I think is really exercising school leaders at the moment is that they are making choices that are the least bad thing to do. And that is not necessarily what we came into leadership for. You came into leadership to do the best you could possibly do for a school, but right now, perhaps in many settings, the best we can possibly do is the least bad thing. There will be consequences for all of our decisions. Something that somebody prizes and enjoys and is important for the pupils may have to not happen. But that is the least bad thing to do, because if you don't make some of those choices, you could end up in a position where literally nothing is happening for anyone.
Yeah.
But I do think that is well worth unpicking in this sort of discussion and helping people think through, because the good enough decision that is all right. That won't do any particular, that will do least damage, is a most unnatural decision for active, positive school leaders to make. And yet I rather suspect a great many of us are making those decisions now on a daily basis, and finding a way of rationalising those. And it won't surprise you to hear, for me, that rationalisation absolutely goes back to the why. What matters most, and how much of that core can be retained.
I think a key, so I completely agree. I think a key word that you used there was positive. My experience of working with everyone I've ever worked with in education is that the majority of us are pretty optimistic, hopeful. That's why we do what we do. We came into education with a passion because we wanted to affect change for young people and for future generations. It's kind of almost inherently an optimistic point of view, not without exception, obviously. But I think that it's when people who, generally speaking, have that sense of I'm doing this career because I'm optimistic about the future and I want to make a difference, then to realize you're having to make a decision which is it's the best decision, but only in contrast to lots of other worse options on the table. And especially that feeling that the status quo is no longer valid is a really uncomfortable feeling to be in. That feeling that we don't have the luxury of status quo decision making. We have to make a leap into something, and we're going to make a leap into the one that looks the best of a bad bunch of ideas. It doesn't sit easily with someone who's generally optimistic and positive. I think that's where the disconnect comes in emotionally.
It is, and I think to keep ourselves as a group of school leaders in the right frame of mind, we again just have to acknowledge that is exactly what we are doing, and that we are making the best decisions available to us at the time. So it is without doubt a really challenging time to lead schools, and many colleagues are in very different positions, but all facing those challenges. And we are, I think I talked earlier about the need to give ourselves permission to do things. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to know that we are doing the best we can do.
Yes.
Normally that best is striving for perfection and excellence, and all of the things that we've spent our careers doing. Right now, we are still doing the best we can do. And arguably, in many, all school leaders would think that they are doing better than anyone else could do, because they know their school a bit better, they know their circumstances a bit better, and they're able to try to drive forward so far as they can. For me, the remarkable thing at the moment in the independent sector is how positive people still are. Because it would be perfectly possible to arrive at a number of events, conferences, meetings, and find a much more downbeat atmosphere. And that isn't because people have their head in the sands. It isn't ignoring the problem. It is just trying their very, very best to make their schools a success. And that circles us right back to where we began. Their schools need to be a success because of the young people in it.
Yes. So there's various different loops back to the early parts of our conversation, but the one that strikes me is this putting the children first. The number of people, I mean, I've heard it all the way through my career, people have said that, but in recent years, like, that has been the thing that people coming back to. The young people, the children, they come first. Where does the decision best serve them? And then we're doing our best. It's a way of creating that hope and optimism of we are doing our best to lead our organizations forwards. And what loops back to me is that comment that you made earlier on about being, not doing. And if the being, meaning the way that you walk around the school, the feeling that you give to people, it isn't about being fake confident or being status driven, like I'm the head. It's about being secure in yourself. And if that being is challenged by all the challenging decisions that people need to make, that reminder that the children comes first, the reminder that we're doing our best, the reminder that there are others in the sector with similar challenges, allows us to be the person that we need on top of the on the stage in front of the microphone giving the assembly, or walking around the corridors saying hello to the children, or indeed please tuck your shirt in to the children as they're going about their daily business. The one who walks into the staff room, the common room, and is able to just be calm and listening and present. When we're talking about being, not doing, a lot of it comes back to the ability to juggle these things, doesn't it?
I think that's absolutely right, and for me, you summarise their school leadership as it is, and it is very much a state of mind. It is an extension of what you are as a person, but the school is more important than you are, and it is definitely not a jobs list, although of course we all have those as well.
Yes, indeed. So if there was one thing you'd like the listeners to take away from our conversation, perhaps even one thing you'd like to tell your younger self in this point, what would be the core message you'd like people to take away?
It would be that message of allowing yourself permission to take time to think, to understand that the bigger picture, and understanding it allows you to make the smaller choices. That idea of being, not doing. And above all, for colleagues in the sector today, that we are doing our best, and that will be focused on young people, and ultimately that is what we came into educational leadership to do. So let's all hope we continue to really enjoy doing the best we can do for our schools.
Thank you. Wise word indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Philip, for the time you've spent with us today.
Thank you. A great pleasure to join you.
Thank you for listening to the Independent School podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, I invite you to join my email list and hear more of my fresh thinking on leading strategically through complexity and uncertainty. Visit www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Remember, the biggest challenges you face are rarely solved by working harder. They're solved by thinking differently, with the right trusted advisor in your corner. While I work with leaders across many sectors, my heart and more than 2 decades of experience remain deeply rooted in education. If you're ready to turn complexity into progress, sharpen your focus, and lead a happier, higher performing team, I'd love to start a conversation about how we could work together. Just reach out anytime. And don't forget, the clearest insights often appear when you gift yourself a moment to slow down and let your best thinking surface.